When you close your eyes and picture Wimbledon, what do you see?
Tennis.
It's the tennis, right. It's strawberries and cream, the royal box, pristine grass courts, and that very polite sort of hushed applause.
Yeah.
It's the absolute pinnacle of Southwest London affluence. It's the kind of place people work their whole lives to buy a home. It just screams safety, respectability, order.
It's the ultimate picture of stability, and that setting is, well, it's actually the most important character in the story we're unpacking
Oh,
today.
absolutely.
Because we're looking at a case that just completely shatters that image of suburban safety. We're peeling back the hedges to look at what happened behind the doors of a 900,000 pounds flat in that very neighborhood.
We're diving into the tragic and, frankly, infuriating story of Sophie Lionnet.
It is.
And this is a heavy one. I want to warn you right up front. We're dealing with a case from 2017 involving the murder of a 21-year-old French woman. But our mission here isn't just to, gawk at a true crime headline. We want to understand the mechanics of how a dream of self-improvement, something so many young people embark on, turned into a nightmare of paranoia, control, and ultimately violence.
Exactly. If we just look at the violence, we miss the lesson. The violence is shocking, yes, but the psychology behind it,
Yeah.
that is what we need to dismantle.
Right.
This is an examination of trust, the incredibly specific and dangerous power dynamics of live-in employment, and a shared delusion that cost a young woman her life.
So let's start with Sophie, because in stories like this, the victim often gets reduced to just a footnote, a grainy photo on the news. But looking at the background here, Sophie Lionnet seemed like someone we all knew at 21. She was from Troyes, a town in France, and she wasn't some risk-taker or wild child.
Far from it. The description that comes up again and again from her family and friends is that she was incredibly kind, gentle, and optimistic.
Optimistic.
And shy, too. A gentle soul is the phrase her mother used. She was at that age where you're just starting to figure out who you are, what you want from the world.
And she had a very specific, very relatable goal. She wanted to learn English.
It's a rite of passage for so many young Europeans. You pack a bag, you move to the UK.
Immerse yourself.
Yeah, you immerse yourself in the language and you experience life abroad. It's supposed to be an exciting chapter. It's supposed to be about growth.
Right, and the standard vehicle for that journey is becoming an au pair. I think most people get the concept. You live with a family, help with the kids, and in exchange, you get room, board, a chance to integrate into a new culture.
It sounds like a fair trade. On paper,
Okay, but yeah.
ideally, yes.
Yeah.
But structurally, it's a system built entirely on trust and vulnerability. You are inviting a stranger into your home. But on the flip side, that young person is completely dependent on you.
Completely.
Sophie moved to London in 2016 with that exact expectation. She didn't think she was just getting a job. She thought she was joining a household. She expected safety.
And she landed in that affluent Wimbledon setting we mentioned. She was hired by a couple, Sabrina Cooter and her partner, Wissam Madouni. Now, from the outside, this looked like a pretty solid setup.
It did. Quita was a French-Algerian woman who presented herself as a fashion designer. Very glamorous, very put together.
Okay.
Madouni was her partner, a bit quieter. They had 2 young children. For Sophie, this probably felt like a lucky break. Nice area, a French-speaking connection to help her transition, but an English environment to learn in.
And initially, the timeline shows that it was normal. You can find photos from the early days where Sophie looks happy. She's looking after the kids, doing the school run.
But then there's this shift. And this is what I find so terrifying about this deep dive, how normal can just be a mask that slips.
Yes.
That's the crux of it. Behind closed doors, the dysfunction was already there, just waiting for a target. The environment in that house didn't just deteriorate, it transformed into a pressure cooker. And to understand why, we have to look at Sabrina Cooter's mindset.
Right, let's unpack the why. Because this wasn't about Sophie doing a bad job with the kids. This wasn't about burnt toast or being late for school pickup. This was about an obsession.
It was paranoia, pure and simple, but it was a very specific, celebrity-focused paranoia. Cooter was absolutely obsessed with her ex-partner, Mark Walton.
Mark Walton, as in the founding member of the Irish boy band Boyzone.
The very same. They had a past relationship, it ended badly, and Cooter could not let it go. She became convinced, and we're talking about a complete break from reality here, that Mark Walton was plotting against her.
And somehow she dragged Sophie into this fantasy.
That's the tragedy.
Yeah.
Courter concocted this narrative that Sophie, this shy 21-year-old from Troyes, was actually a spy.
A spy.
A spy. She believes Sophie was planted in the house by Mark Walden to steal personal information, to abuse the children, and to facilitate some grand conspiracy against her.
I just want to pause there because it sounds so absurd. Was there even a shred of truth to this? Did Sophie even know who Mark Walden was before this?
Zero. None. The investigation was exhaustive on this point. Sophie Lionnet had absolutely no connection to Mark Walden. She wasn't a spy. She was just a nanny.
But in the landscape of delusional paranoia, facts just don't matter.
They don't matter at all.
And this brings us to the partner Wissam Madouni. Because usually if one person in a relationship starts talking about boy band conspiracies and spies, the other person, they act as a reality check. They say, hey, that's crazy. But Madouni didn't do that.
No, he didn't. And this is a textbook, albeit horrific, example of what psychologists call folie à deux, or madness of two. It's a shared psychosis.
Right.
You have a dominant personality, which was undoubtedly Queeter, imposing her delusion on a more passive partner. Instead of stopping her, Madouni bought into it. He adopted her reality.
That makes the situation infinitely more dangerous for Sophie, because now it's not just one difficult boss, it's a united front. Two authority figures against one isolated girl.
Exactly. They created a hermetically sealed fantasy world inside that flat. In their minds, they were the victims.
They were.
They were the ones under siege by this imaginary Mark Walden plot. And Sophie, in their twisted logic, she became the villain in their living room.
And once that narrative is set, everything Sophie does gets reinterpreted through that lens. If she's quiet, she's plotting. If she denies it, she's lying.
Precisely. You cannot reason with irrationality. If you deny the accusation, it's proof of your guilt. If you stay silent, it's proof of your guilt. Sophie was trapped in a logic puzzle she couldn't solve because the rules existed only in Cooter's head.
So let's talk about how this moved from paranoia to abuse. Because it didn't start with violence overnight. It was a slow burn, wasn't it? A boiling frog situation.
He used classic coercive control. Before a hand was ever raised against her, they stripped away her autonomy. It started with the interrogations. Imagine the dynamic. You're sitting at the kitchen table, and your employers, the people who control your roof and your food, are grilling you for hours about things that never happened. Where's the recording device? When did you talk to Mark?
And looking at the timeline, they cut her off from the outside world, too.
Yes. They stopped paying her, they confiscated her ID, they restricted her access to her phone. This is how you create a prisoner without using bars.
You make them destitute.
Financial destitute and socially isolated. Sophie couldn't just book a Eurostar ticket home. She likely didn't have a pound in her pocket.
And then came the sleep deprivation.
Which is a form of torture, let's be clear about that. It's used to break resistance. They would keep her up all night with these interrogations. When you deprive someone of sleep, their cognitive function creates a fog.
Of course.
They become confused, compliant, emotional. It shatters your resilience.
They even forced her to sleep on the floor.
They systematically dehumanized her.
Yeah.
If you treat someone like an animal or a criminal long enough, it becomes easier to justify the violence that follows. And the violence did follow, escalating drastically.
We have to be honest about the brutality here because it speaks to the depth of their delusion. The court heard she was tied up with electrical cables. She was beaten.
And burned. They used hot metal. They beat her with whatever was at hand. This wasn't a sudden fit of rage where someone snapped.
No.
This was weeks of sustained, methodical cruelty. Sophie was living in a house of horrors.
There is one detail in this case that I find particularly disturbing, and it's something we're seeing more and more in modern crimes. The technology aspect.
Yeah.
They filmed the abuse.
It is chilling. They recorded these interrogations on their smartphones. Hours and hours of footage.
Why? Why would you record yourself committing a crime?
Because in their minds, they weren't committing a crime. They were gathering evidence.
Evidence.
Remember the delusion? They thought they were exposing aspiring. They were recording Sophie's forced confessions. Confessions they tortured out of her, thinking that one day they would show this to the police or Mark Walden and say, see, we were right.
That is a twisted kind of logic. So they're playing detective while they're actually torturing a young woman.
Essentially, yes. And for Sophie, imagine the surreal terror of that. Being tied up, in pain, starved, because they were starving her too, with a smartphone camera pointed in your face, demanding you admit to things you've never even heard of.
And she eventually did, didn't she? On the tapes, she starts agreeing with them.
She did. And that's what happens under torture. You will say absolutely anything to make the pain stop.
Just to make it stop.
Sophie admitted to the fantasies just to get a moment of peace. But of course, admitting it just validated their paranoia and likely made the punishment worse.
And despite all this, the visible injuries, the broken ribs, the emaciation, she never saw a doctor, never went to a hospital.
No. She was treated, in the words of the prosecution, like a prisoner of war. Queter and Madani were fully aware of her condition. You cannot inflict over 130 separate injuries and not know the damage you were doing.
They knew.
They knew. They watched her deteriorate day by day.
It all comes to a tragic end in September 2017. Sophie's body just gives up.
She collapsed. After weeks of beating, starvation, and stress, her heart and her body simply couldn't take it anymore. And this is where the callousness of Queter and Maduni really hits a peak.
When she collapsed, they didn't call 999.
No. They delayed. They panicked about themselves, not her. The timeline establishes that they waited until she was unresponsive. They were still focused on their narrative, even as she was dying on the floor.
So by the time paramedics were finally called,
it was far too late. She was already dead.
Yeah.
The medical examination later was horrific, as you mentioned, over 130 injuries, fractured sternum, broken ribs, deep bruising, burns. The pathologist concluded she died from a combination of the physical trauma and the immense physiological stress.
It's absolutely heartbreaking. I keep thinking about her family in France. They thought she was safe. They thought she was just away.
It is every parent's nightmare to send your child out into the world to learn and grow, only to have them fall into a trap like this.
So let's move to the trial. This case went to the Old Bailey, the Central Criminal Court in London, and because of those videos they took, their so-called evidence, the jury essentially had a front row seat to the murder.
The evidence was overwhelming. The jury saw the footage. They heard audio recordings of Sophie screaming, crying, begging for mercy. It painted a picture that no defense lawyer could really talk their way out of.
It must have been.
It stripped away any claim of it was an accident.
But they did try to defend themselves, right? They didn't just plead guilty.
Oh, they fought it.
Yeah.
And their strategy was quite typical for this kind of toxic partnership once the handcuffs go on.
They turned on each other.
Immediately.
Yeah.
The classic, it was him, it was her defense.
Right.
Queter claimed she was mentally ill and that Maduni was the violent one. Maduni claimed he was just following orders, trying to calm Queter down. They tried to minimize their own roles.
And they denied murder, I think.
Both did, yes. They admitted only to perverting the course of justice initially. They claimed there was no intent to kill.
Look at this.
Right. They tried to frame it as an interrogation that went too far, rather than a murder.
Mm.
But the jury looked at the duration of the abuse, the severity of the injuries, the starvation, and they rejected that completely.
And in 2019, the verdict came down.
Guilty. Both of them. Sabrina Queter and Wissam Maduni were convicted of murder.
And the sentencing?
Life imprisonment. The judge set a minimum term of 23 years before they can even be considered for parole.
Wow.
And the judge didn't mince words. He described the case as one of the most shocking examples of domestic abuse and cruelty he had ever seen. He specifically noted the calculated, remorseless nature of their behavior.
It's hard to wrap your head around that level of malice in a domestic setting. But once the gavel came down, this case sparked a much bigger conversation in the UK, didn't it?
It really did. Because once you strip away the celebrity delusion and the extreme violence, you're left with a structural problem. The vulnerability of Oa Harris.
We talked about the power imbalance earlier. This case seems to be the worst case scenario of that imbalance.
It is. Think about it. Your boss is your landlord. They control your food. They control your internet access. Often, they hold your documents.
So if you quit your job,
you don't just lose a paycheck. You become homeless in a foreign country instantly. That dynamic is just ripe for exploitation.
And there's no HR department in a private home.
Exactly. Who is checking on these young people? There is no oversight. A factory has inspectors. An office has labor laws and witnesses. A private home has a front door that locks. Sophie fell into a gap in the system where no one was looking.
The legacy of this case, then, is a push for better protection.
Yes. There have been continued calls for better monitoring of host families, not just the au pairs. We vet the workers, but we rarely vet the families. This case highlighted that dangerous asymmetry.
You know, throughout this deep dive, I keep going back to that initial description of Sophie. Kind, optimistic, adventurous. It feels like her very nature was weaponized against her.
Her family said something that really sticks with you. They said she was a gentle soul who trusted the wrong people. And that's the tragedy of innocence meeting malevolence. Sophie didn't do anything risky in the traditional sense. She didn't walk down a dark alley at 3 a.m. She answered a job ad for a wealthy family with kids.
She did everything right.
She did. And that's the hardest part to reconcile. We teach people to be careful of strangers on the street, but we don't have a playbook for how to spot the monster living inside a polite suburban, semi-detached house.
Kindness was mistaken for weakness.
And her trust was repaid with absolute cruelty.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave everyone with a thought to mull over. We have this cultural concept of home as a sanctuary. It's the safest place on earth. It's where we retreat to when the world is too much.
Yeah.
But for Sophie Lionnet and for thousands of invisible domestic workers, the home is the workplace. It is a private sphere with no security cameras unless the abusers are holding them and no witnesses.
It raises a frightening reality. Sophie traveled for independence. She traveled for opportunity. She believed that a domestic setting equaled safety. But as this case shows us, behind a quiet front door, without oversight, absolute power can corrupt absolutely. The most dangerous place for her wasn't the streets of London.
It was the guest room.
It is the guest room of her employers.
It really forces you to look at the invisible workers in our communities a little differently. This was a tough one to get through, but I think it's an important story to tell. Thank you for listening to this deep dive.
Take care of yourselves.
We'll see you next time.